Alright, got a little bit of a meta video today. We're going to be going over my picks for top 5 uncommon banner units in the game. By uncommon, I mean the blue rarity, which as far as banner units are concerned is actually the most common variety. I figured it didn't make sense to include rare banner units in this discussion because it's sort of implied that rares should always be more powerful than uncommons. That's not actually the case, but just for the sake of keeping things in line, we'll just only compare uncommon units against each other. Another thing I will say is I'm not going to include the Monster Train 1 units in this discussion because if you've seen the developer roadmap, you'll know that eventually we're going to get some significant reworks to Monster Train 1, so it's probably just not that beneficial for me to talk about them. So we're only sticking to banner units, so the units that have a little banner here on the left that I'm highlighting here. They're the priority draw units. You find them at the banners on the map, so it won't be units like Songbird or Punk Shredder. Those are different from what I'm talking about. But yeah, so and the way I evaluate them is really just two main things. It's like, if I see the unit offered to me, how often can I comfortably take it, regardless of my situation? And also, if I take it, how likely is it to be a significant contributing factor to me winning? So some of these units that won't make the cut probably are good on one of those fronts, but maybe not so good on another one. Like Moral Mistress, for example, is not going to be in my top 5 because it doesn't really hit high enough on that first criteria of when I see it, how often can I take it. I think there's enough decks that it's not necessarily so good in, but on the second criteria, Moral Mistress definitely hits. If I actually have a deck that makes sense for her, she's very good, but I think she is not takeable enough to make my list. And then maybe like Silent Sentinel could be an example of the other half of it, where it's like, I can take it pretty often. There's really not much downside to taking this unit. It's pretty self-sustaining, but there's not maybe so much upside that it's like hard carrying a run or really contributing a massive amount to winning a run a lot of the time. So that's kind of the criteria we're going with, and I guess we already kind of got 2 of them out of the way. That are not going to be in there. But so let's start with number 5. We're going to go over to the Underlegion. Make your guesses as to which one I'm going to pick here. All right, 3, 2, 1, time's up. Prickly Puffball. Prickly Puffball, the puffy cousin to the Titan Sentry, Frost Shark, Hot Shark, whatever you want to call it. And who knows, maybe it's better. I think it is better. But it's definitely pretty equal in power, and we already know that that's a very good unit, right, from Monster Train 1. It does 5 decay to each attacker, which is equivalent to 15 damage the moment you play it, and then, of course, so on and so forth. If you're playing it on the bottom, they'll have additional ticks of damage all the way on up the train, and also very good for Relentless if you're getting a lot of decay stacked onto a boss. This unit also takes Merchant of Steel upgrades quite well. It really wants to see... It can make use of four big upgrades pretty well, which would be Titanite, Dualism, Large Stone, and Endless. Any one of those 4 upgrades, you can mix and match them, and you're going to have a good time with Prickly Puffball. It's a lot of the units that I'm going to pick on my top 5 kind of have this low maintenance to them, where it's like you just put them down and they do their job. Obviously, if you're not endless with it, you may want to pick up some healing, but there's a decent amount of healing already and within the clan of Underlegion, and then maybe you can get some help with the other clans. But yeah, it's just a very solid unit, very takeable. It's very rare that I see a Puffball and I'm like, oh man, I can't fit this into my deck. You know, it's just always going to be a really solid addition, and very often it's one of the main sources of damage and tanking for you. I mean, if it can tank and deal damage, like that's already two huge problems to solve that are now solved, right? But, you know, sometimes survivability can limit the upside, which is why it's not maybe higher on the list, but certainly 5 is still a pretty good spot for it. And I'd also like to give an honorable mention to this guy down here, Spore Launcher. I didn't put Spore Launcher in the top 5, but the Puffball and Spore Launcher have some similarities in what they're going to accomplish. The Spore Launcher obviously doesn't really provide the tanky, or it isn't really focused on the tanky aspect that Puffball is, but it still has good base stats. And, you know, the thing is, Spore Launcher just isn't quite as self-sustaining as Puffball, in my opinion. You do have to kind of build your deck a little bit more into it, and you do have to, like, support the unit to get it to work a bit more. That's why Spore Launcher is not making the top 5, but it's not very far off from Puffball. Like, I'm generally pretty happy to see a Spore Launcher as well. All right, now we're going to move on to Banished for number 4 here. And, you know, make your guesses here. 3, 2, 1, time's up. Firebrand. Firebrand is just maybe the most easy to take unit in the game. There's really no deck that doesn't want to Firebrand, or 2 or 3. It's like one of the premier frontline units in the game. It's very self-sustaining. The only real knock against Firebrand that I could say is that the vanilla form does require a little bit of support to survive, because, you know, Valor 2 on Revenge and 30 health is not quite enough to make it self-sustaining, but all you got to do is hit a Merchant of Steel and this thing becomes self-sustaining. You know, similar to the Puffball, it has a lot of upgrades that it wants to see. The 2 premier upgrades for Firebrand, in my opinion, are going to be Titanite and Dualism. You know, Dualism doubles the amount of Valor you're gaining. That's really good. Makes it do more damage. You know, it doubles its damage and survivability, whereas Titanite doubles its survivability. You get them together, you're basically quadrupling your survivability. So that's the ideal, is to have Titanite and Dualism, but they're not far behind that is Large Stone. You know, you're not always going to find the exact upgrades you want, and Large Stone is absolutely fine to settle for. You're just getting a ton of health to help with, really it's like you just need to survive a few hits so that your Valor starts stacking, and then once you get to a point of no return with the Valor, it's like he'll just keep surviving and just keep stacking armor and damage. It's just such a nice self-sustaining unit that you just kind of set and forget it. And it fits into anything. You can put it on its own floor. You can put it on your main floor. Either way, it's going to be fine. I usually will, in the late game, dupe a Firebrand just because it's really nice to go into the Titan fight knowing that I'm just never going to take damage from the Savage Titan, because Firebrand's just not going to die. You could also put multi-strike on it sometimes if you're really caring about the attack damage of Firebrand being relevant. I really don't put multi-strike on it that often, but you could do it if you're just not finding anything else. So there's not. I don't know what much more to say about Firebrand. It's just an incredibly solid self-sustaining unit that doesn't require much from you other than simply upgrading it. I will give another honorable mention here, just because there was a unit that was in pretty close contention with Firebrand for this spot, which is right next to him here, Avenger. Avenger is a tank that's definitely been growing on me more and more as I keep to play it. And I don't know, maybe eventually Avenger I will consider better than Firebrand, but my main thing with Avenger is it just isn't as self-sustaining as Firebrand. It takes all of the same upgrades just the same, right? Titanite, Dualism, Large Stone, it loves all of those. It actually doesn't even mind a Quick sometimes. You know, if you put Quick on Avenger, that's if you're wanting the unit behind it to get the melee weakness hit. You know, you're basically just preventing Avenger from popping melee weakness. But, you know, generally with Avenger, it's like it requires a little bit more. You know, you do have to actually play cards to get the Valor onto Avenger to keep it surviving. So that's probably why I'm ranking it lower than Firebrand, but it's pretty close. He's better at wave clear compared to Firebrand in a lot of cases. But Avenger also has a little less versatility with where you're playing it. You're typically wanting Avenger to be on some sort of a main floor or a secondary floor where there's units behind it that are really doing a lot of the damage. But it's not far off. Avenger's very good as well, but Firebrand gets the fourth spot here. And then we go over to my favorite clan, the Lazarus League. Now make your guesses here on which one I'm going to choose, and I'm going to add a little caveat there after I choose it. 3, 2, 1. That's right, it's everybody's favorite unit in the game, Test Subject Alpha. Now, I do feel a little peer pressured into this pick, I ain't gonna lie. Because I think this is going to be the number one pick on a lot of people's lists, and I can't really argue against it. My thing with Test Subject Alpha, it really has nothing against Test Subject Alpha. The unit is amazing, but guess what? Lazarus League happens to be really amazing, and also they have some great champs and some great spells and some great non-banner units that often will take over a run. So as a result, Test Subject Alpha, out of all of the units that I am putting into this top 5 list, by far actually is a focal point, or even is less of a focal point of my runs from run to run compared to these other 5 top units that I'm picking. So that's why I'm saying I do feel a little bit peer pressured into this one, but I had to fit into the top 5 somewhere. And when you see the units that I put at 2 and 1, I think you'll agree with me that I think that those are better than this unit. But the thing with Lazarus League is their spells are so good that the most easy thing you can do is to stack Reanimate and Unstable or Spikes on a unit, and just that solves the entire game. So that's why Test Subject Alpha, through no fault of its own, just ends up not actually being a carry unit for me quite often with Lazarus League. But all that being said, I mean, what more can you want from a unit? It has quick and sweep built into it, and it's not even that expensive at 2 Ember. They could make this thing 3 or 4 Ember and it would still be worth it, But yeah, amazing unit. It doesn't take quite as many upgrades as my 4 and 5 slot. Mainly you're just looking for large stone or multi-strike. It already has quick, so that's already filled. But yeah, I mean, what more can you say about Test Subject Alpha? As long as you have some ways to scale it, which Lazarus has plenty of ways to do that, and maybe your secondary clan has a lot of ways to do that. It's just a quick sweeper. I mean, that solves so much of the game, right? As long as you can scale it, that's going to be a premier carry unit. And I swear I'm not going to do this for all these picks, but I felt like it also kind of needs an honorable mention of Plague Doctor. Plague Doctor's almost right there with Test Subject Alpha. The only real difference is sometimes if you don't have enough damage to kill the tank, then it's a bit worse than Test Subject Alpha, because obviously you're not getting like the AoE effect at that point. But and also it doesn't come with quick baked in. But it is in some ways it's better than Alpha. It really doubles its damage in a way. Even more than that. It's basically a sweeper as long as you're killing the tank that's in front, or as long as you're killing whatever unit Plague Doctor hits, then it is pretty much equivalent to sweep. So Plague Doctor actually is very similar to Test Subject Alpha. You can definitely build around it as a damage carry. But I don't know, it doesn't get the slays the same way that Alpha does. There are some pretty good slay equipment in the game, such as Bloodthirsty Blade and Organ Harvester, which Test Subject Alpha makes use of a lot better, or just simply the Pyre of Savagery. So Alpha definitely I think is better than Doctor, typically speaking, but they're not massively far apart. So that's my number 3 pick. Now we're getting over to Firebrand, and guess what? We're going to stay there for the final 2 picks. Now, if you've watched me, you know for sure one of these is going in there. But yeah, you make your pick for number 2. You got 3, 2, 1, time's up. Hothead. So Hothead is kind of like the test subject alpha, except along with quick and sweep, it also has multi-strike. And then some. I mean, seriously, it's like, look at this this ability here, fire breathing. It deals the damage twice to every unit. So that's a sweep, that's a multi-strike, and that's before, we're not even factoring in that, it's going to have its normal strike when the turn actually happens, right? Now, sure, the cooldown is 2, so it's not by default going to be getting played every turn, but let's be realistic. Most Firebrand runs will get this cooldown down to 1 eventually. There is, and I'll take off the filter here, but there's the Mind Cage. Just simply putting that on the unit will get its cooldown to be able to play every single turn. And then there's also the Tome of Contracts. That'll get its cooldown down to 1 every turn. But wait, that's not all. There's the Taskmaster's Lash, which in some runs, not a lot of runs, but in some runs can allow you to not only play it every turn, but maybe multiple times a turn. So this unit is absolutely cracked, Hothead. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets nerfed in the future. So, depending on when you look at this video, you can compare what the stats cost effect is, because it might get nerfed. But I like it being OP. It's fun to have an OP unit. I don't know. That's Monster Train 2 in my opinion. It doesn't necessarily take too many upgrades super well. I think Large Stone's probably the premier upgrade. Just give it some survivability and some extra damage. It takes the small cheap upgrades pretty well. Just putting simply a plus 14 attack on it is pretty good. That's basically 14 times 3 if you think about it at a minimum. It's also okay with multi-strike. An assumption here is that you're going to be scaling this thing offensively, so obviously a multi-strike makes sense. And yeah, that's Hothead, and we're not going to give an honorable mention here because there's nothing than Firebrand that really is close to Hothead and what it does. Hothead's pretty unique for what it does for Firebrand. All right, drum roll, please. What is the number 1? If you've watched my channel, you know what it is already. But yeah, 3, 2, 1, time's up. Greed Dragon. That's right. Greed Dragon is far and away the best unit in the game, in my opinion. To me, Greed Dragon feels on the level of, like, in Monster Train 1 DLC, getting like a Endless Transcendent with the machine gun. It is that level of just, this run is solved the minute I get this unit, It's just insane how good this unit is. Now, some people might not... I'll be honest, when I first played the game, granted I had a head start on everybody because I was a tester, but it took me a long time to really... I thought this unit sucked when I first played, because I'm like, oh, why would I... it's only 10-10 for an egg. Like, these eggs get me artifacts. They get me gold. Why would I ever do that, right? But, once you actually play it, all it takes is one time to realize how strong this unit is. It's... to put it in a perspective, if I'm just taking the default 8 eggs, granted there's obviously ways to increase your max egg count, but let's just say 8, that's plus 80 to this unit that's already a 2035. So you're looking at 100 damage and 100 and, I'm not going to do, I can't do simple math right now, but whatever the health is, it's a lot. It's like not that far off from a Shadow Siege. So for 2 Ember and 3 Pip, you basically have Shadow Siege Light. And if you can increase your eggs, or find a way to resummon the unit, because it is a summon effect, remember that. Or if you're like with Hellhorn, you can get the double summon artifact. There's a lot of ways to make these stats just absolutely pop off, but they don't need to, right? Already just the fact that it's 100 attack and over 100 health is pretty wild. And that's the base. That's the worst you're getting from it. It also takes pretty much the largest array of Merchant of Steel upgrades and takes them well. It takes multi-strike, Smidge Stone. It likes to just go down to a small unit that I can play a bunch of them on the floor. Did I say multi-strike? Endless. Endless is super good on it because you're just resummoning it every time it dies. Just get giant Greed Dragons when you're doing that. Titanite's pretty good on it too. I mean, if you think about it, Titanite is basically doubling your health, so it's like, 135 or whatever the health is, 100, 125, 115, whatever it is. 115, that's what it is. See, I got there eventually. It's simple math, I can get it. 115 times 2 with Titanite. So, just an insanely good unit. Every run feels absolutely solved the minute I see a Greed Dragon. Now, I'm sure there's some crazy seed where somehow there's 0 offerings of Dragon Horde. But I think that's pretty unlikely. I mean, let's think about this. Like, if I just go back to everything here. Lady Gilda, both champs have a path that can get eggs. So Gilda has one. Phoenix has one. There's Devilish Details. I think we can just search for Horde, maybe? Egg? Never mind. Wait, Horde. Yeah, there we go. So, Devilish Details, Guildmonger, Banner Unit, Golden Touch, Common, Alchemy, Common, and Soul Smelter. So, you'd have to miss on both of these commons, Alchemy and Golden Touch. You'd have to miss on this uncommon, which is, super common, Guildmonger. You'd have to miss on the rare. You'd have to not get the not get the champ paths of Lady Gilda's Egg Path or what's his name's Egg Path, and you'd have to not get Soul Smelter. And even to a lesser degree, you would have to not get this one, Prismatic Dragon Scale. So that would be, I don't know what the odds are there. I'm just going to throw out a guess and say that that's like maybe or below a 1% chance to miss on every single one of them. So realistically, you're always going to be able to, you don't, you get eggs. And the thing is, you don't need that good of egg generation for Greed Dragon to be good, because the assumption here with Greed Dragon is that you are just holding the eggs and not spending them. That's what I would recommend to do with the unit. There's no real reason to spend them when you're just holding them, and you have this unit now that can get you a giant amount of stats. And another thing is, like, once you have your eggs, you can just remove the other card. If it's an Alchemy or a Golden Touch or something, you may just not need it anymore, and then you can remove it and just keep the eggs. So yeah, for me, I think hands down Greed Dragon is the best unit in the game. It's just the easiest error it's not like very error prone. Like I could mess up a run trying to build a good Hothead sometimes, right? But I can't really mess up a Greed Dragon. It's just this giant stat stick that you place down, and it just kills everything and survives everything. So, yep, that is my top 5, and I can throw out a few more honorable mentions just because I feel like people are coming to this video wanting to know which units are good, and there's some good ones that were pretty close to making the list still that should be called out here. So, Shadeguard was pretty close to making the list. Luna actually didn't have any units make the list here. And if there was going to be one that made it, Shadeguard would have been the first candidate. It kind of fills a similar slot as like those tanks like Firebrand and whatnot. It's just a very solid tank. I think the reason I don't quite rank it as high as something like Firebrand or Prickly Puffball is it does require a little bit more massaging to get it to work, because it does have to end on New Moon, which isn't so hard if you're like if we think about like the starter cards, Moon Ritual will make it pretty easy, but you still have to end on that moon phase, which may not be conducive to your game plan sometimes. But mainly it's a problem when you start with Witchweave. When I start with Witchweave, I may not really have much control over my my moon phasing, which makes Shadeguard significantly worse. There obviously is the new moon room that makes the new moon effect always go off, that can mitigate that problem, but you're not always going to find that room. Roughly only in about 60% of runs will you find that room, which is a decent amount, but it's not like a giant amount. So, and then I think on top of all that, even when I am getting the effect every turn, it's obviously very good, but I don't know that it necessarily has the ceiling as some of these other tanks that I included in the top 5, like Firebrand and Puffball. So I think Shadeguard just narrowly misses the list, but it's a very good unit. I definitely highly recommend taking it most of the time you see it. And then the other Luna unit that I probably would have maybe made the list would be Selene Acolyte. If it'd be most comparable to the test subject Alpha, the main problem here is it doesn't always have the sweep, and it doesn't come with quick baked in. But it does have something pretty big here, which it could give it an edge sometimes over a test subject Alpha, which is the Mage Blade 2. A lot of runs you can actually stack kind of a ridiculous amount of conduit, so this unit actually just naturally is a way to scale, and it does mean that Selene Acolyte very often is a main unit to your that's basically what you're going to focus your run around. And lately in some of my runs you'll notice the full moon not sweeping, the new moon not sweeping is actually kind of a benefit sometimes, because there is a lot of perma-scaling stuff in the room in the game, such as like Arduin perma-scaler and whatnot, and they might want slays sometimes, and the ability to just shut off sweep actually helps you do that sometimes. So it's actually pretty good from a greed perspective to shut the sweep off, but if you do need the sweep, it's a similar problem to Shadeguard. It's actually a little bit higher of a problem because there isn't some room that just allows the full moon effect to go off every time. So it is actually a little bit harder to guarantee the sweep with Acolyte compared to like a Shadeguard, but it's still a very good unit, and it wasn't too far off from making the list. If I did a top 10, these two units definitely make it in, I think. Top 10 just seemed a bit much for me to number out when there's not necessarily that many banner units to choose from. And then the other, can't talk. I only really have one other honorable mention here, which is going to be Cluster Kernel. I think a lot of people would probably list Cluster Kernel in their top 5, and that's totally fine. I can't really argue with it. For me, I think my main problem with Cluster Kernel is it mainly shines if you pair it specifically with a Spore Launcher or with the Rally version of Belit, the champion here, Belit. I think outside of that, it's not super powerful, at least in the late game, in my opinion. Early game, it's always going to be powerful because spawn 4 every turn is just actually pretty nuts as far as the early game is concerned. But come mid to late game, if you're not pairing it with like a Spore Launcher or a Belit, then I think its ceiling is severely limited. There are some runs where maybe you could pair it with a Squad Leader. You're still going to have to like supplement it with other spawn cards, most likely. So it does require... It's supposed to be kind of a self-sustaining unit, but it doesn't always come off that way, in my experience. It also just doesn't take Merchant of Steel upgrades very well. None of... Pretty much Smidgestone's about the only one I can think of that it really wants to see. And even then, it's maybe not the best sometimes. So, it's just... It doesn't take, like, Titanite, Multi-Strike, any of these upgrades particularly well. So that just further limits the upside, in my opinion. So that's the reason cluster kernel doesn't make my top 5, but it's another one that probably makes top 10 if I expanded it to top 10. It's definitely a pretty good unit. And that's really all I have to comment on. I was, and I, maybe I could go over rares at some point. I don't know how useful it is to actually do any sort of listing with the rares, though, because they're all you don't see them that often, and they're supposed to be OP. So maybe I could just say what the worst ones are, because there's definitely some of them that some of them that suck. Fire-blooded. But yeah, anyway, hopefully that was useful. Let me know what your own personal top 5 are. There's no wrong answers here. I mean, there are, but we'll pretend that there's no wrong answers. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.